Often enough with help of somebody else.
Oh,
And
hey,
that's
sorry.
one of the
Just in a bit of an
challenges.
existential video watching moment here today, but welcome. It's your friendly neighborhood Badger. We're going to be talking about something pretty serious today, and that's Path of Exile balance manifestos. Now, a lot of you may have known so far, Path of Exile is going to be releasing a ton of info in their balance manifesto, or should I say 3 balance manifestos? Part 1 is Flasks and Ailment mitigation. Part 2 is core character defenses and recovery, and Part 3 is auras, curses, and elemental damage over time. Now, this is insane. I think even Bex said there's going to be around 14,500 words. I think it was 14,447 on their draft of amount of Balance Manifesto words coming to us, which is a little bit crazy. That being said, we're just going to jump into it because the first part, Flasks and Ailment Mitigation, has been released as of today. Now, let's just quickly talk about what we're going to be seeing here. Path of Exile is presenting problems that they have encountered in 3.15 or before, solutions that are being brought in 3.16, and then a ton of specifics as well. Now, the specifics are very large. There's a lot of specifics, so we're not going to be going fully into them, but I'm going to be giving a very basic outline of what this actually looks like for 3.16 going forward in my eyes. So let's just jump into it. The first thing that I will say, though, I shouldn't have to say this, and GGG shouldn't have to say this all the time, but they say basically this last sentence here: please note that as we're still a couple of weeks out from release, anything here is subject to change based on our further testing and your feedback. So, you know, if you're sitting here, you're reading Purity of Elements is now giving plus 20 to 34 to all elemental resistances, but that's plus 21 to 35 in the patch notes, and you're like, well, GGG said that we would be getting a little bit less elemental resistances. This game is going down the hole. Don't be like that. Like, we know that this game by now is on a really tight update schedule, and things are subject to change even to the last day. So let's just jump into it. Ailment mitigation. Now, ailment mitigation. GGG says in 3.15, we changed our Flask to present ailments and curses on you, but didn't provide enough reasonable alternatives for mitigating ailments. Now, this was really seen in especially softcore when people were like, look, it's not that easy for me to now get elemental ailments. Say, for example, even just taking Raider or taking Inquisitor for elemental ailment immunity through their ascendancies, which, by the way, were just way too easy. It was kind of like, let's just not take them and just die a bit more. And that's kind of just what happened. And people, there were ways to get element immunity, but it was, you had to jump through so many hoops to be able to get it, like get a bunch of stuff on the tree and then get, you know, maybe like a helmet craft or a chest craft or something like that as well. But what they're doing right now is introducing a large number of options to improve existing options for characters to deal with ailments. So characters should now be able to pick between reservation skills that mitigate ailments, remove effects reactively with life or mana flasks, gain immunity at a cost through utility flasks, or use improved modifiers on items and the passive skill tree to mitigate ailments and curses. What do they mean by this? Now, without me, reading everything in the specifics, basically they mean they're giving so many more options to us, and also improving some reservation options, which are the two things I'm going to talk about specifically. There's a really big one in Purity of Elements. We did quickly talk about that before, but Purity of Elements is now going to be giving us allies. You and nearby allies are immune to all elemental ailments, and gaining all early res as well. Now, this is really, really big, but they're also increasing the reservation from, I think it was 35% like the rest of the Purities to 50%. Yeah, previously 35 right there. So increasing the reservation, but you're now immune to all elemental ailments. This is something that some characters will now think about taking, especially characters that do spec into a little bit of reduced reservation. Now, what this is going to mean for, aura bots or aura stackers or something like that, we'll have to wait for part 3, which should be in a couple of days, of the Balance Manifesto, because this is a pretty awesome change to aura bots in their current state, I would say. Yeah, but basically what it's going to look like is we're going to have a lot more options to be able to mitigate ailments. Yeah, once again, I know that it was kind of a thing that especially softcore players this league were like, let's just not even think about it, because I could either get elemental ailment immunity, or I could get you know, 30, 40% more damage through passive points. What was the option for a softcore player? 30 to 40% more damage every single time. Let's move on to Flasks. Now, Flasks is massive, and we're going to zip through it, but I am going to quickly talk about this, of their problems and solutions. So, problem. Many Flask modifiers grant buffs during Flask effect, which isn't well suited to a life or mana flask short and reactive nature. Now, this is super, super true in terms of life and mana flask. So, they've added new modifiers to life and mana flask that are impactful but brief, and have a duration rather than applying Flask effect. Just quickly, for example, hindering for 4 seconds if used while not on full mana or not on full life, which is really, really nice. Or immunity to hinder, which is pretty cool as well, some things like that. Another problem was utility flasks are usually used proactively, but ailment protection modifiers introduced in 3.15 work by reacting to an ailment on you. So replacing ailment removal modifiers on utility flasks with one that grants ailment immunity but lessens flask duration. Note the base durations on utility flasks have been increased to compensate. So this was a change that was made previously in like 3.14 and before. You could get ailment immunity on your flasks. Then they took that out, making you could get ailment immunity if you removed that ailment, right? But just activating it and then, you know, going into shocked ground or something like that would still shock you or something like that. This is going to mean that it lessens your utility flasks, but grants that ailment immunity proactively instead of reactively, which I think was the better way to do it. Though Path of Exile does want us to be a bit more reactive on things like this, it's such a fast-paced game and so one-shotty that we need to be proactive. We need to go, okay, that pack over there looks dangerous. I'm going to hit my, you know, bleed immunity flask or something like that, or ignite immunity flasks, and then jump into it. So yeah, it's a really, really good change. Another problem was utility flasks are sustainable with enough character damage and clear speed, but there aren't easy ways to sustain utility flasks for less powerful characters. So what do they mean by less powerful characters? Builds that aren't as good as the top meta, basically. And this was a really, really big problem. It actually widened the gap between the fast clearers and the not-so-meta builds, and I noticed that as well trying to, you know, play some non-meta builds, that you just couldn't, sometimes you couldn't clear fast enough to even get your flasks back, meaning that the build felt like 200% less powerful than it probably should have been. So they've added new modifiers and improved existing modifiers on flasks that affects their duration or charge gain. Add some new passive skill trees to help passive skills to help sustain flasks, and extend the base duration of utility flasks to reduce how often they need to be used. So basically, you know, increasing golden iron flask, bismuth flask duration, amethyst flask duration, all of that kind of stuff as well. But then there are some unique flasks getting reviewed as well. So Dying Sun is going from reduced duration to less duration, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, hopefully this will just help some slower clear builds. Now, here's another problem. Even after lowering the power of many unique flasks in 3.15, unique flasks still outclass most magic utility flasks. In addition, the item level of flasks did not matter after a certain point. So the solution was to add multiple tiers to flask modifiers. Ooh. At higher levels, flasks now have much more powerful effects available. Flask modifiers that increased armor or evasion are now weaker at their first tier as the changes to armor and evasion below make them more powerful. These changes also allow us to restore some of the power that was removed from flasks in 3.15 without affecting the early mid-game so much. So this actually just looks like a buff, basically. You can see right here, all of this just looks like increased. So they did talk about unique flasks, but they haven't mentioned unique flask nerfs. What they've talked about is, yeah, unique flasks are too strong. Let's balance magic flasks up to them. So that is that's pretty promising. Really promising. Here's another problem about enkindling orbs. Enkindling effects on flasks aren't impactful enough and aren't bringing flasks back to the kind of power that non-permanent uptime should grant. So solution, buff some enkindling orb effects. More buffs. Most notably increased flask effect modifier. So just to quickly give you a little bit of an overview, it's around about maybe a 20% buff, 20 to 25% buff to enkindling orb effects right there. Now, here's another problem about belts. Belts are the item slot intended to enhance flasks, but only have a limited list of modifiers that actually affect flasks in their modifier pool. Solution, add more tiers to flask modifiers on belts, and move the flask effect modifier out of the influence modifier pool into the base modifier pool for belts. Now, here's a little bit of a controversial opinion on this. This might not play out well. Now, first of all, adding more tiers doesn't really solve the problem. As we know in Path of Exile, it is difficult to target craft items now, or make items exactly how you want to. And adding more tiers to something like Flask effects, where it's not targetable through anything like Harvest or something like that, actually makes it a little bit more difficult to hit those modifiers. And also, it widens the pool of builds themselves. Also, moving Flask effect modifier out of the influence modifier pool actually means that it's less targetable. So when you first look at this, you're like, yes, more Flask effect modifiers that might be really powerful on belts. But what I'm seeing here is just more tiers of things in the base pool, which is going to make it more difficult to roll a good belt. So that's all I really have to say with that. We could look into the specifics there, but yeah, it's to me, that one's a little bit iffy. Here's another problem about instant life recovery. Instant recovery life flasks are by far the most reliable tool for survivability. I very much agree, as the total life recovery from a flask is reasonable but spread over a long period of time. Also very much agreed. So the solution was to keep the total life recovery from all life flasks the same, but halve the amount of time for this to occur. So this basically means that we're just doubling the speed of any life recovery that's not instant, which is really, really, really nice. I think that's a great change. Here's another problem. There are no accessible tools for a player to change their charge gain method if gaining charges on kill isn't well suited to their slower playstyle. So the solution was to rework the survival jewels attainable from the Through Sacred Ground quest to let you gain charges another way, while reducing the charges gained from kills. So this is really interesting. So they don't have any spoilers here, but I'm expecting something like 50% less charges from kills, one charge every 3 seconds on your flask, or well, probably not that, because that sounds really, really insane. This could also mean that we could have a lot more options against sustained boss fights, switching in duels for sustained boss fights, like your endgame bosses and everything like that, which would be really nice. So here's another problem. Rangers don't have a form of life recovery they excel at, while almost every other core character has a signature special recovery method. This is really true. So the solution was to add new and improved existing passive skill trees, specializing in the recovery of charges for life and mana flasks, as well as life recovery from flasks in the Ranger section of the passive skill tree. So this is basically meaning that GGG is saying, if you're a Ranger, your form of recovery should be your flasks. Not even just if you're a Pathfinder. If you're a Ranger, if you're a Raider, if you're a Deadeye, you're using flasks for your life recovery, which I think is fairly problematic unless they absolutely nail life recovery from flasks. I think it'll feel really good, but this basically means, look, every other life recovery almost wasn't conditional by this point. Life leech, you're pretty much always attacking and leeching. Consecrated ground, you're always gaining life. You're always on consecrated ground if you're like an Inquisitor or something like that. Like, you're always on it. What else do we have? We just have, standard life regeneration around the Marauder and Inquisitor area. That's always ticking. All of them are not really conditional, but life flasks are conditional. So they kind of have to be non-conditional for life recovery to feel really, really good on a Ranger, in my opinion, but it's probably going to feel pretty good. That's about it that I have to talk about. Once again, I'm not going fully into the specifics because this video would turn from 14 minutes to 40 minutes, and that's not really what I want from a video, but you can expect a video like this for part 2 and part 3 when they do come out. Let me know your... Ooh, bit of a bull squeak there. Let me know your favorite thing and your least favorite thing in the comments about this right here. My favorite thing probably has to be more ailment immunity everywhere, and my least favorite thing has to be the flask stuff on the belts. Flasks, flask modifiers on belts is what I should say. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below. If you do like this content, remember to hit that sub button because I'm going to be producing a ton more content coming out into 3.16. And remember, a lot of you still don't know, but I do live stream on Twitch. I'm taking a short, like maybe 4 or 5 day break at the moment, and just getting some videos out and everything like that. But I'll be back raring and ready to go on 3.16. So catch me over there at twitch.tv/thisisbadger, link down below. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, Badger is out.